Okay.
21, take one.
Okay. You've built a career in films by creating a character called Woody Allen, in quotes, and then making fun of him. How much of the real Woody Allen is in that character?
Little bits and pieces, but not a lot. It's mostly, prefabrication.
Why do you think people always insist on seeing the things as autobiographical?
It's a good question. I don't know. I guess because from what they read in the newspapers about me, they seem to feel that there's a direct correlation between the events that they read in the newspapers and events portrayed in the movies. But it's very deceptive, because I might do a film where there's just a little flavor of something that's real in it, and everything else completely prefabricated. And what they come away with, for some reason, is the whole thing is real because of the one thing they recognize.
But presumably, if you improvise a bit, I don't know if you do, but if you do, then it must get more real in those moments where the characters are saying.
But we don't improvise much. I mean, it's usually, very much written.
Mm-hmm. You've made one film a year virtually since the mid-1960s, which is a fantastically productive record. What keeps you going? What makes Woody run?
Well, it's not all that big a deal when you think of it, because that's what I do, is make films. I mean, it's not that I'm torn between other activities, and the kind of situation within which I function, that is, I have a long-term arrangement for making films. So it's not that I have to get an idea and sell somebody the idea and go find an actor to play it and spend 2 years making deals with people and going to lunch and doing all that nonsense. As soon as I'm finished with the script, we're in production the next day. We're off and in pre-production, anyhow, the next day. And so it's not that big a thing. I have a number of ideas for films, many more than I could make, really, in my lifetime. I have a drawer full of ideas, and when I'm finished with a film, even a little before I'm finished, when they're doing the sound effects work and there's a little hiatus for me from the day-to-day grind, I start to pull out one of these ideas and work on it, and it doesn't take me that long to do a script. And, I don't shoot them interminably. So one film a year is not, it's not really a big thing. I mean, there are people that, Sidney Lumet has made 2 and 3 films in a year. It's not that, and Robert Altman has. It's not that big a deal.
Mm. You've often said that the writing for you is the most attractive part, the most enjoyable part of filmmaking. And it seems to me that recently you've been making your films more and more like the process of writing. I mean, that the bits you shoot are like making a first draft, and then you work on that a bit, and then you go back and do a second draft, as it were, as if the film...
Right, though I've always worked that way, really. I mean, right from the first picture I ever directed, Take the Money and Run, I worked that way. I didn't know I was working that way. I mean, it wasn't a pre-planned thing, but that's how it came out. I wrote it and worked on it, shot it, and then noticed many things wrong, and went back and reshot them again. And you can have the luxury of doing that if you're able to work within a small budget, because the film I just finished now, I shot the entire film from start to finish. I edited it and looked at it and didn't like it, and shot the entire film again from start to finish. I threw out everything, the whole thing. I didn't save a single frame from the original, and I shot the whole thing again and made many changes, and went back and did supplementary reshooting and all that. And it still is a very modest budget film with all of that. And it's not necessarily a wonderful film either. It's just that in order to get it to survive at all, I had to do an awful lot of work on it. But if you stay within a limited budget, nobody bothers you.
Turning to Radio Days, your most recent film in Britain, to come out in Britain, with 200, roughly, speaking parts and period sets, and the logistics of it must have been quite something. I mean, how was that after doing a sort of chamber piece like Hannah and Her Sisters? I mean, is that the kind of filmmaking you enjoy?
I don't enjoy the big, Radio Days was hard for me because there's a lot of, logistics with 200 people and various sets and mob scenes and many costumes. Occasionally, I get an idea that necessitates that, but I'd much prefer to do smaller films because it's just easier physically.
And even in Radio Days, you work with your family, as it were, with Mia Farrow and Diane Keaton and Tony Roberts.
Oh yeah,
and
I would always work with people that I know because it's just much easier for me. It's difficult for me to to do a picture with someone that I don't know at all, because you never know what's going to happen. I have no idea whether the person is going to be easy to work with or difficult, or is ready to work in my kind of style. You know, if I finish a film, I can call up Diane Keaton or call up Mia or Diane Wiest and say, I have a great idea for a new scene. It's better than the one we did. Let's meet in 2 weeks and do it. And they say, sure, because they live near me, and it's very informal and easy. But if I was doing a film with, for example, Jack Nicholson, somebody who I admire but don't really know, you know, I can't just call him up and say, drop in and let's do another scene. He may be off doing a picture in China. And so it's a tough way to work for me.
Part of Radio Days is all about, as it were, people crossing the Brooklyn Bridge. You know, New York has a great yellow brick road, and how people are brought out the other side of the bridge. And it feels like your own memories of what it was like to first cross that bridge. I mean, is that so?
There are a number of legitimate memories in that, and an awful lot of exaggerated, things that I made up.
But can you recall what it was like to first go to New York City in 1941, wherever it was, with your dad?
Yes, I do remember what it was like. It was just a great, great experience. Crossing the bridge itself was nothing. You just sat on the subway and went across the bridge. But when you emerged from downstairs from the subway and came up at Times Square, 42nd Street, I would be with my father, for example, or father and mother. But I remember coming with my father, and it was, you couldn't get your mind around it. It was spectacular. There were, just hundreds of movie theaters, one next to the other, going strong, and arcades and street entertainment and soldiers and sailors and tremendous tumult, and it was really a spectacular experience. And then walking around there, all the wonderful restaurants and colorful characters that you would see, people selling apparently stringless dancing dolls up against the buildings, and valises of neckties, and shoe shine people. And I mean, it was great, absolutely great. And it was already on the decline then. When it must have been just breathtaking, it was probably the 20s and the 30s. I don't have a good memory of it before 1941, and that's quite an early memory for me.
But I mean, today's children taking the same trip would get a hell of a shock.
Oh, it's a different thing entirely. It's degenerated tremendously architecturally, and now it's, what is it? It's prostitution and pornography and dope addiction, and it's dangerous.
Going back to your very first film as writer and actor, although not as director, What's New Pussycat, you've said that it was a completely exasperating experience to be involved in that. Do you still hold that?
Yes, because it was, I handed in this script. They asked me to write it. They paid me to write it. And it was the fault strictly of the producer of the film. He just had no feel for that kind of material and overproduced it. I was very fortunate. It was my first script, and we got Peter O'Toole, who's still one of our truly great actors, and Peter Sellers, who was as great a comedian as I've ever seen, and a director who I liked very much at the time named Clive Donner. And they were lifesavers on the project, but there was nothing much anybody could do, because it was one of those big Hollywood-style movies, and too much was being dictated from the producer in the front office. And
yet, looking back on it...
22, take one.
If you put all your scenes in What's New Pussycat next to each other and play them, which I've recently done, as it were, there's more of the Woody Allen that was to come in them than I remembered. You know, there's the germ of quite a lot of things that you were...
It's possible because I did write it, but it wouldn't represent me at all. I had said a long time ago that if they had let me make that picture, you know, that I think it would have been a better picture, but would have made infinitely less money. It was a very big success financially, undeserved, I thought. But we all struggled. I mean, the director tried his best, and I tried my best. You know, we stood together against the incursions by the Philistines, but you know, we just neither of us had any real clout, and so they just did what they wanted to do.
There's the satire on psychoanalysis runs through it very strongly in the Peter Sellers character.
Yeah, I'd hardly call it a satire, and you know the way it worked out. It's just a lot of you know overly broad, foolish.
But you wanted Groucho apparently to play that part, which sounds a very interesting idea.
Yeah, I don't remember that now, but at that point, it's possible that I did because I was so enamored of him. But that would have been also before we knew we could get Peter. You know, that was Peter Sellers had just had a heart attack, and he was not working. This was his first picture after his heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as they said they'd gotten him to appear in it, you know, that couldn't have been more thrilling. I mean, I couldn't have been more blessed on a first picture to have a cast like that. It was just great, and it's a shame that the people on top, you know, wanted the picture to represent a certain style of filmmaking.
The critics seem to be quite shocked in a way by the morality of the film. But by the time you made Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Sex, which is on a similar theme in a way, everyone was more prepared to see a sex comedy as opposed to a romantic comedy.
Yeah, I don't really remember much when What's New Pussycat came out, because as I say, I didn't direct it, and I was not really too interested in it when it came out, and only went to see it because I was dragged by actually the producer, who he said, you can't be in London when it's opening and not come. It just looks terrible. But I don't remember it being particularly sexy or anything. I mean, I don't remember it well at all now. Everything You Always Want to Know About Sex was quite a bit later.
Yeah.
And it was in the 60s. I mean, in the
70s,
later 60s,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And by then you could do anything you wanted in films from a sexual point of view.
Well, I mean,
Not that I did, but you could.
What possessed you to turn this brilliant idea of turning Dr. Rubin's sex manual into a comedy?
Oh, it's funny. You said a brilliant idea. I was going to say I had a bad idea one night. I came home one evening from a basketball game, and I was getting undressed, and I turned the television set on for a moment, and I was just going to go to sleep, and I saw Dr. Rubin being interviewed, and it just crossed my mind out of left field. It would be fun to make a movie of that book and do different sketches relating to each different question, and I could have renowned performers in each one. And it was, and for some reason the idea gripped me, maybe because I was home alone in bed, or, you know, and that was the genesis of it. But in retrospect, I don't think it was a very good idea, and would not do it again if I had it to do over. Would not do it again.
Uh-huh. Can I turn now to your first film as a director, Take the Money and Run? It seems that you were learning the craft of film in a way as you were going on with. Is that right?
Yes, I was learning it for a number of pictures. I mean, I really learned very little on my first film, actually, in terms of craft. I was just stumbling my way, and hoping that, falling back on the fact that I was sure that I could be funny, that I could write funny things and present funny things and perform them. But I didn't know the first thing about filmmaking, or not the first thing. I knew this, though, that it was going to be a pseudo-documentary in style. So I had something to hang on to. I had a structure to hang on to right from the start.
And you pile a lot of gags in. I mean, you shoot as many targets as you can in that film, in a way. And there's less emphasis on plot and much more on the gags.
Right. There was probably a stronger plot in it when I wrote it, but when the thing finally came out and I was forced to cut out lots of material that didn't work and quickly put in other material that would work, probably the net effect is a series of gags.
There's the famous scene where your parents in the film don Groucho masks to talk to the interviewer, and you've been quoted many times as saying that in actual fact your mother does resemble Groucho Marx. Is that,
right,
is
but
that
those
so?
are two separate things. I'd never thought of those masks as Groucho Marx masks.
I see.
They're just sort of cheap novelty disguises that one could buy in a little store in New York, and I would, as I grew up, I would always see them along with many other stupid little practical jokes and novelty items, and so when I was writing that, I wanted my parents to be ashamed of me, and we thought of masks, but that looked funnier, so we did that. Now, in regard to your question, I know it sounds facetious, but it's true. My mother's side of the family does resemble the Marx Brothers. I mean, they resemble that, and if you look at Groucho, some of those photos of Groucho when he didn't have the mustache and some of those candid shots when he was younger, there's a great resemblance between my mother's whole side of the family, not just her.
That's
But
extraordinary.
it's a familial resemblance. I mean, she doesn't indeed look like Groucho.
I understand. Bananas as well, your second film, deals with the world of television and the media, parodies of various things, bits of film, bits of television, whatever, and particularly about how television presents politics to us. Was parody the thing that interested you most then? I mean, the idea.
No, and I wouldn't say it dealt with that. There were just a couple of TV scenes in the picture. It was as I had always seen that picture. It was a broad gag comedy, but it was essentially, sort of a thin disguised plot to hang jokes on that revolved around a revolution in South America somewhere and a love story. But I had never thought of it at any point as being a parody on television, with the exception of maybe one or two scenes in the full length
The
of the movie.
sports cast of the
Yeah,
last scene.
yeah.
All that, yeah.
But you can see how one or two things like that will go a long way to creating that impression in someone's mind.
But you don't see it as a political satire of any sort.
No, I
pushing
don't. I
it
mean,
too
it
hard.
happens to be about revolution in South America because that was a funny subject to me at the time. But it's not really very satirical. It may have an occasional individual gag in it, which is a satirical joke, but it's mostly, sort of a surreal. I don't know what to call it exactly.
It has a kind of line of tradition to the silent comedians, I always think, as Take the Money and Run does. The Keatons and the Chaplins and all the rest of it, which later you broke that chord, to that tradition.
Right.
Did you feel that? Do you think that's so?
Yes, I felt that was true, because in those days, when I was first doing films, I felt the things that were most critical to me were the works of people like, the comedians, Chaplin and Keaton and the Marx Brothers, and I did that right through Sleeper, which was my most similar to the old silent comedies. But I abandoned that shortly after that because it didn't really interest me.
I mean, do you think that people are, in a funny way, too grown up to enjoy that entirely physical humour these days?
I hope so. You see those films and they're great to look at, but you sort of tacitly place them in your mind in a certain, period. And I think that stuff would be infantile today, and that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, but some of the themes, like the way they can't cope with technology ever, and machines get their own back, and houses fall on them, all those things. I mean, there's a kind of timelessness about that as well, isn't there?
The timelessness, I think, is how well the person does it. It's that Keaton did it so great and Chaplin did it so great, so it will always be fun to watch them do it. But you're watching them with the knowledge down deep that you're seeing an old film. If somebody came out with a film like that today, it's not as interesting Not to me, anyhow.
Is that perhaps Buster Keaton hadn't read Freud? Maybe that's the reason. Yeah.
Keaton was a great artist, I think, and those films do hold up, but I think it would be no fun to actually make one today.
Moving on to... Yeah.
Or Woody Allen profile. 23, take one.
Yeah. I think your early films were much more concerned with parody of things that people might watch or think about than your later films. And someone like Mel Brooks stayed with parody, if you see what I mean. You know, he's continued to make films which depend on something.
He likes that. I was not interested in parody. It never would have occurred to me. I mean, I wouldn't agree with you, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I was going for gags of any sort and any kind, and if an occasional joke, an occasional piece of a film turns out to be a parody of something else for a brief moment, that's purely accidental. Mel, on the other hand, comes from the Sid Caesar tradition very fully. I worked with Sid too, but very briefly. But he worked with him for many years, was very close to him. And one of the staples of that show was the parody of operas and films and television shows. And Mel likes that very much. He's always loved that. So consequently, he will do whole films that are parodies and enjoys it.
It's a way to reach a mass audience in a funny way because everyone's got something in common with it.
Sure. I mean, you can't say that. You know, everyone knows.
Yeah, they get the references because they're pretty commonplace and all the rest of it. Your next film, Play It Again, Sam, seems to me to be quite a breakthrough in your career because for the first time you bring the audience into your world. You've got a character that is the Woody Allen character in embryo, and you know the audience could sort of recognise that character and be drawn into that world. Do you see it like that?
Well, I don't want to always sound like I'm downgrading my own things, but I didn't direct that film,
yeah.
as you know. It was a little stage play that I wrote many years ago, mostly to give myself an opportunity to appear on stage. And I always thought of it as, you know, just a very light little conceit, and I never had any interest in making it into a film. And I was very fortunate that Herb Ross directed it and did a very good job on it, you know. But for me, it's not something that I look back on with any great pride or anything. It was something that I did at the time because I just couldn't do any better. I wanted to get my feet wet, you know, as an actor in the theater, and that's the only once I was out of the play, I didn't care what happened to it. I mean, the fact that they asked me to play the movie a couple of years later, that was fine and a nice opportunity for me. But I had no, you know, it's not something again that I would do.
It's quite I mean, I hate to sort of upgrade as you downgrade, but it's the very beginning of it I always find quite moving, actually. You've got this close-up of your face watching Casablanca, and you're sort of intoning the words, because you've seen the movie so often, and there's this kind of, God, I wish it could be true look on your face, which I find, you know, it's very touching.
Well, that's good luck, then. I mean, that's great. I'm glad you do. And the picture was successful. It just wasn't one of my own personal favorites.
When you made Sleeper, your next film as a director, you used the resources of cinema, obviously, much more thoroughly than you had before, with the special effects, the design of it, the science fiction setting.
This is true.
I mean, was this a mark of more confidence as a director?
Well, yes, I had directed now several films before it, and I was trying to... There you could see a step forward for me. I was starting to not worry about simply getting the film in on budget and on schedule only, but, you know, working with the sets and the costumes and the photography more, and trying to develop myself as a director. And I look back favorably on that film because of it, because I think a lot of things worked that I tried to do. And they were of benefit to me.
Must have been hell to make.
It was very difficult to make. We made some of it in Colorado and out in Northern California, and that physical stuff and the special effects stuff is hard
Mm.
for me.
Does the world as it might be in 2073 or 2173, whenever it's, does that interest you? The idea of what the future might be like, or was that not the point?
Well, it wasn't really the point. The point was just that one day I was walking down the street and thought, gosh, it would be really funny to do a movie where I get frozen and wake up in the future. And my first thought, which the studio was willing to bankroll, was that it would be a 3-hour film, a two-parter. The first part would be an hour and a half comedy in New York City with me, and at the end of the hour and a half, I would fall into a vat of, the cryogenic vat and get frozen. Then there would be an intermission, and when they'd come in for the second half, we'd be totally in the future. We'd be 200 years in the future. But when I started to write that, it was a Herculean task. I mean, I just couldn't do it. It was such a massive undertaking that I said, forget it. We'll just do the futuristic part of it. And it's just an attempt to make it was a good comic setting. Another ploy that interested me in that was I thought it would, because I was, as I said before, then have a frame of mind that really was responsive to silent comedy. I wanted to do something where I woke up in a society where nobody spoke, where it was against the law to speak or nobody spoke, and I would have had to have played the whole film as a fugitive but silent. And it would have given me an excuse to make a silent comedy without actually doing a throwback. But that also, my interest in that waned as well, and I decided just to do, cash in on the funny idea and try and make it really more satirical of contemporary society than anything I envisioned for the future.
And what one surprise is that one always expects that the soundtrack of such films is going to be on synthesizers and all the rest of it, science fiction, modern technological music, and you chose New Orleans jazz as your soundtrack.
Right.
Why did you choose that?
I did because I wanted, the kind of synthesizer sound, first of all, I don't like, and atonal music or anything you might associate with futuristic music, is not very good for comedy. And really what you want is what you associate with the old-style comedies, the honky-tonk piano. And so I thought that would be a good backing for comedy scenes, to hear that New Orleans-style music is a perfect accompaniment to those kind of scenes, and that was the only reason that I gave myself the job of being a part-time clarinetist, because originally I was someone who worked in a health food store, and that was all. And then I made myself an amateur clarinetist as well to justify my use of that soundtrack.
Right, but jazz is still important to you. That New Orleans jazz.
Yeah, sure. I'm a great New Orleans jazz fan.
In Sleeper also, there's you and Diane Keaton are developing a sort of relationship of foil and lead comedian, as it were, that hadn't appeared before. Was all that scripted, or did that emerge during the filming? The sort of banter between you.
No, it was scripted, and we had worked together on stage in Play It Again, Sam, and in the movie of that, and we were very close friends. And she's a hilarious comedian, and that was the easy part of it. I mean, that was the easiest part. Most of it was written. It was whatever has the air of spontaneity is probably because we did it well then. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of, because it was scripted, and I'm usually always pretty much scripted.
The punchline to Sleeper, that you believe in sex and death, things that happen once in a lifetime, seems to be the germination of the next one, Love and Death. It seems to grow out of that thought. Or was it something you'd been thinking of making for some time?
No, again, the genesis is always so different than how it appears to the outside eye. I was writing a murder mystery, and that murder mystery later turned out to be Annie Hall. But I was writing a murder mystery for Diane Keaton and myself, where we were going to play two clever New Yorkers and make a lot of jokes on that and get involved with a murder. And then I started writing it, and I thought, look, I don't really want to do a murder mystery because, I don't want to be a mystery writer. And I just had I had a negative prejudice against it at the time. And, and it's funny because I'm such a fan of them, too. And so after some months of writing that, I threw it in the drawer, and it already had several scenes in it that were to be in Annie Hall. the murder mystery began the exact same way, where I'm waiting in front of the cinema for her to pull up, and she pulls up, and we get into an argument, and we go home, and all of that was how the murder began, and so I was kicking around my house looking for something to do because time was running out, and I wanted to do a film. And I just happened to see a Russian history book on my shelf, and I thought, gee, it would be funny to do a film based on all that Russian literature and all those Russian cliches, and I thought it was an area where I could then get in a lot of subject matter that I like to talk about, about philosophical themes and death and longing, and I thought it would be fun to do that, and that's, I thought I would do a cartoon film about it, and tried to make it as funny as I could make it at the time.
Again, logistically. Right.
24, take one.
On the face of it, it's very odd for a 1970s New Yorker to sort of colonise the Russian novel in that way. I mean, it's here's this character who's obviously a 1970s character, stumbling around Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and all the rest of it. I mean, does that strike you as odd?
It didn't at the time. I mean, I've always had a great love of Russian literature and heavy literature and heavy themes in general. I'm interested and attracted to them, and also find them very funny, and so. That was a fun thing to write. Not so much fun to shoot, but fun to write.
I mean, to shoot it must have been a nightmare because, I mean, it's like a sort of De Laurentiis production. All these cast of thousands played, I gather, by the Russian army.
Yes, we used the Russian army, who were in Hungary at the time, and they made wonderful, wonderful soldiers. They could march and drill and do all that stuff perfectly, and they were thrilled to be in the movie because their life was so boring, just occupying Hungary, which is what they were doing, and. It was a tough movie to make. I mean, it was cold and laborious and very hard work. I found not easy, but fun to write.
And since it was such hard work, did it ever cross your mind that maybe God wasn't an underachiever? Maybe he was having the last laugh after all.
No, but I'll tell you what did cross my mind. I was freezing on a hill in Budapest, outside of Budapest one day, and I thought, I'm not going to make any more films out of New York. This is ridiculous. I'm freezing. It's 5 o'clock in the morning. What am I doing in Hungary? What am I doing, on a train to Zagreb next week? It just was crazy. And I didn't make another film out of New York after that.
It's although it has a New York feel to it, doesn't it? Because I know you've always admired Bob Hope, for example, and I always think of that as the most Bob Hope-ish of your films in a funny way. The sort of coward who's also a hero. And talks his way out of these great historical things.
I think you could say that. I didn't like the actual Hope films very much. I mean, I don't think they're very good films. But I think that he alone and he with Bing Crosby were brilliant. He was brilliant, and they were brilliant.
Moving on to Annie Hall. Could you have written Annie Hall, do you think, if you hadn't known Diane Keaton so well?
I couldn't have written that character. No, there's no way I could have written that character because I was taking things directly from things I'd heard her say and her mode of speech. Everyone thought that was an autobiographical film, but in fact it was not at all. Because very little of that was true. That's not where I was born. My father didn't have that job. That's not how I met Diane. That's not how Diane and I broke up. That's just practically nothing in the film is true. I co-wrote it with Marshall Brickman, a friend of mine, and many of the observations and things were based on things in his life that he vaguely recalled, and but it had an autobiographical feel to it to people, and they think that it was my life.
But is the real Diane Keaton like Annie Hall? Not so much the facts, as it were, but the atmosphere of the character.
Her mode of speech is, and when I first met her, she was an out-of-towner in New York, with great naivete, and so there was a great similarity. Now she's very sophisticated because she's lived here for many years and been in the center of the theater and show business, and so she's achieved a certain sophistication. But when I first met her, she was very, very naive, like that character, and didn't know about anything, didn't know about New York City or psychoanalysis or show business, or she was originally she was a Kochek girl. at an Italian restaurant.
Hmm. But you saw her in Hair, wasn't that how you first...
I didn't see her in Hair. Someone told me she was great in
Yeah.
Hair. No, I was. We were having auditions for a female for Play It Again, Sam, and someone said she was great, and so she came and auditioned again, not for me, for the director of the stage play. And I was sitting there quietly only to voice my opinion. He was making the decision. And I thought she was great when she... And then we thought maybe she was a little too tall for me. But she wasn't, because I went up on stage and we played a scene together. And after 2 weeks of looking at more women, we both agreed that she was by far the best one we had seen, and we called her back.
With Annie Hall, the focus on the central relationship between Alvey and Annie seems to have evolved during the shooting. It seems that it was a rather different kind of film to start
Right,
with. I mean,
this is
you've
true.
mentioned that it originally started out as a murder mystery, but even beyond that, it was
Mhm.
more about you, I guess, and your view of
Right.
the world. How did that happen?
Well, this is true of a great many of my films. You know, I set out with very grandiose ambitions and very specific aims, and by the time I'm in the editing stage, the last stages of editing, I'm floundering around and will take anything to survive. You know, it just doesn't matter to me. You know, I abandon many of my original ideas, and so that was originally going to be What Goes On in Alvey's Mind. That was going to be the movie. You were going to see what goes on in his mind, going from bit to bit without much plot, and I just couldn't handle it when I shot it and edited it that way. But it was incoherent. I mean, even when I showed it to Marshall Brickman, who co-wrote it with me, he couldn't follow it. It was too stream of consciousness and too strange. So gradually, in an effort to survive, I reshaped it in editing and a little reshooting, and took the best of it and molded
And
a
that
story.
relationship became the focus.
Right.
Became the story in a way.
Mhm.
Apparently, it was originally going to be called anhedonia, meaning an inability to enjoy yourself.
Right.
And that a United Artists executive, when he heard this, almost threw himself out of the window. Is that true?
Right. They've always been very good with me, and they didn't want to use that title. But, you know, if I wanted to, then they would have said okay. But my relationship with them is one of friendly pleading on both sides. And they said, look, we love the picture and people are going to like it, but, you know, if you put it out at a drive-in theater in Kansas or the Midwest with a title like Anhedonia, no one's going to know what it is or come. And so, you know, I guess from a commercial point of view, they were probably right.
Hmm.
So I changed it.
What do you think it was about that sad romance, which is really at the centre of the film, that struck a chord with, or in such a big way, with audiences in the late 70s? Because people identified with it to a remarkable degree.
Yeah, it's always hard to know exactly what it was. I mean, I thought it was a nicely done film. You know, it had it had entertaining elements to it. I mean, it was well photographed and well played, very well played by Diane, and nice music. I don't know, it had a commercial quality to it. I don't know if it reinforced the prejudice of the middle class, and so
Is that what they
said?
say?
Oh,
Yeah.
that's what. Well, that's what I was thinking. You know, that's us up there, or I don't know. It was entertaining to them, though.
It's also non-macho, which I think is, I mean, in the late 70s was a very important thing to be, you know, when nearly all cinema, as it is now actually, was about the Eastwoods and the Schwarzeneggers and the Stallones and all that. I mean, to see someone who's a hero who doesn't have to behave like that seems to me to be very important.
Could be. I had thought of it only as really as a comedy, you know, and I thought when I was putting it together originally that it would be fun for people to see what went on in my mind, and that I would actually speak to them right from the start and enlist their you know, indulgence, and then I was going to show them what went on in my mind. But the relationship was so strong that nobody wanted to see what went on in my mind. They wanted to get back to the story of the two people.
But there's one serious theme, at least I think there is. You'll probably tell me that it isn't serious, but and that is introducing Annie to the Jewish way of life, as it were. Here's someone from outside that way of life being introduced to it, and there's one or two very dark moments in the film, like when she says that, you know, Grammy would think of Alvey as a real Jew and all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a dark theme to put into a film that's a comedy.
Well, I had never thought of introducing her to a Jewish way of life. You know, it just would never have occurred to me. I was introducing her to a sort of New York show business way of life. I mean, that's how I thought of it. but that comes from reality. I mean, she had these delightful grandmothers, Keaton did, and they were wonderful old ladies, and they were fun to be with. And I met them when they were in their 80s, and they had almost never seen anyone Jewish before, and they had all the prejudices against them. But they were very nice, when I got to know them, and so that came out of that.
Mm. But nevertheless, at the time when Annie Hall came out, there were a lot of writers, for example, like Philip Roth, Joseph Heller, Saul Bellow, writing about the sort of urban Jewish hero coming to terms with the world around him, fast-talking, not at all confident, but making up for that by talking a lot and being... Did you feel that you belonged to that kind of tradition in a way? Because it's a very strong thing in the 70s.
Only vaguely. I mean, I guess vaguely, in that I am Jewish and did live in New York. I have always lived in New York, but I'd never thought of it that way. I mean, I had never thought of, anything Jewish, say, in any of my films is incidental and accidental. I mean, I never think of it as a motif or a problem that I'm dealing with. It's just a fact, like that I live in New York, or that I'm a Democrat and not a Republican, or there's just certain facts, and those are the facts. But I never saw it as a...
Transcription cassette also required. Roll a 5 Woody Allen profile. 25, take 1.
Okay. When you made Interiors in 1978, you said that comedy was really like kiddies' food, and that you wanted to eat at the grown-ups table for once.
Mm-hmm.
Did you really believe that?
I do. I have very specific ideas about that, and I don't mean to proselytize or convince anybody of the way I think. These are purely personal ideas. But I do see a difference between comedy and so-called serious drama, and I personally hold one in higher esteem for myself. I prefer one to view. I prefer one to do if I could, and I do think I do make a value judgment and find a deeper value in one than the other.
But it's a massive downgrading of your own work in a way, because I would have thought your whole work stands as an example to the contrary.
I don't think so. Now, again, I don't mean to downgrade comedy. I think it's a wonderful thing, and but I put the other on a higher plane myself, and I think to the degree that some of my films have been good, it's been to the degree that I could make them more serious, and to the degree that, say, Charlie Chaplin was more outstanding to me by far than, say, Laurel and Hardy or Buster Keaton even, or Harry Langdon. It was because he chose to get more serious. Sometimes he got so serious that it didn't work. But what gives his film more richness is that there's seriousness to it. And for me, the great artists, of course, I like the dramas of Shakespeare, and I don't like the comedies of Shakespeare very much. And I, very much like Strindberg and Eugene O'Neill enormously. Chekhov very much. It's just my own personal taste.
That all comes through in Interiors in a way. It sort of belongs to, I think, to a kind of tradition of European drama, of just the kind of tradition that you've mentioned.
To that kind of thing, and that's my favorite kind of drama, and I'd like to do more of those kinds of movies in the near future.
Mm. Visually, Interiors is in my view, an extraordinarily controlled film, which of course is one of the themes anyway of the story with Eve, and it raises this interesting issue of whether a comedy can be quite so beautiful. That sounds a strange thing to say, but whether it's a distraction to make a comedy so stylish and well designed as that film was.
To a degree, yes. To a degree, in a comedy, what you want is fast-paced cutting, not camera moves, and not, bright lights and loud voices. I mean, in the best sense, it's got to have a certain verve and energy, and you don't want the camera drifting around in a kind of lethargic way, or strange half-lit faces, or the nice thing about the Buster Keaton comedies or the Marx Brothers or any comedies that you like, they're clean and fast-paced and well-lit and full of energy, and so I do think that the techniques are different cinematically when you're making them.
And if you did have that sort of incredible control over the design that I think in interiors is an extraordinary achievement, that maybe one wouldn't laugh. I mean, one just wouldn't realise one's supposed to laugh at it.
Right. To a degree, that's true. I think you would hurt your laughs. It'd be like pouring syrup over them. Sometimes you see people trying to make a comedy in the United States, for example, and they'll hire a great cameraman, a truly great cameraman, just because they know his name. And he'll light it, and it will be beautifully lit, but it becomes oppressive. That's not really what you want. You want the thing. And that's why, to me, also, making a comedy is not as much fun, because the real tools of the cinema you can employ in making a dramatic film. Whereas a comedy, you don't. What you want, in the case of Chaplin or Keaton or the Marx Brothers, is basically a record of the material, of the comedian's performance, or you want great simplicity and speed and simplicity, and that's not as much fun to wallow in when you're making a film. It's fun to fool around with controlled situations and interesting lighting and psychological nuances. It's just more fun.
Now, a lot of critics think that in Manhattan you have your most mature work, which manages to be funny and serious and true all at the same time, and yet you've often said that you think it's overrated by them, that they went overboard about Manhattan and they shouldn't have done.
Yeah, again, I'm not trying to downgrade my films. It always does sound that way. I'm just trying to be objective about them. When I look back at Manhattan, there were many things about it that I liked, but essentially, it didn't really go far. It had one foot in escapist romance, and one foot in a slightly more serious theme. And what carries you through Manhattan, for me, is more the style than anything else. That it's beautifully photographed, and it's fun to see Manhattan, and my passion for the city and my passion for the Gershwin music was entertaining for people. But I would do Manhattan differently now if I was to do it. It's not a film that I wouldn't do today, but I would do it. I would do it differently.
But nevertheless, that theme of the romantic view of the city, set against the mess that people make of their lives on the one hand, and on the other hand, the sort of culture that we've got around us today, which is difficult to be romantic about,
right,
is, for me, its great strength. That the fact that it's doing two things at once, it kind of collides them.
Right, I think that is the best of the thing.
But I'm surprised to.
I mean, I don't dislike the film. It's just that I was surprised at the enthusiasm with which it was met.
And Isaac, the central character, by now is confident, knows his way around, very very confident in many ways, and miles away from the little man of the early films who
right.
was damaged and lots of things happened to him. Do you think it's difficult to be funny about such a character? Because the more competent people are, on the whole, the less funny they are.
Well, no, you can be. It's a different kind of funny. I mean, in Bananas or something, it's an infantile type of funniness, but in Manhattan, it's different. It's more adult and wittier. And I don't think it's difficult to. I mean, I think one example of that would be someone like Saul Bellow, who's enormously witty. I mean, really witty in his novels, and totally competent, the characters, and full of insights and full of observations, and it's just a different style of comedy.
I still can't puzzle out the final moment of the film. Perhaps you can enlighten me. when Tracy says, you've got to have faith in people, and Isaac stands out, and there's a smile on his face, and I can't make up my mind whether he's saying, isn't it marvellous to meet somebody who believes this, or is he saying, come on, you know better than that. In other words, you know, is it an upbeat ending?
Well, what we had thought about at the time on the ending was we weren't sure what was going to happen to that girl, Mariel Hemingway, when she went on with her life. Whether she was going to become cynical and like the other characters in the movie, or retain her youthful sweetness. And so, you know, it was a sweet smile. I mean, it was a smile of affection for her, but some skepticism about, you know, what was going to happen to her in the future.
Yeah, so it's both in a way. Yeah. Because then you slam in Gershwin and it's all upbeat again and everything. But it's a very interestingly sort of enigmatic moment, I think.
Right, I like the ending. That was an ending that we shot quite early in the shooting of the film and never had to change. You know, I mean, we shot it the second week before the whole film was done, and we never had to change it. It just worked well for us.
You said that Manhattan's about cultural junk food, you know, that it's about that sort of false opening of the film where he wants to make it a film about a culture in decay and all the rest of it. Do you feel that American culture is kind of disintegrating around you?
For the most part, I do. There's a strain of very good American culture. I mean, we have some wonderful writers and wonderful painters, but in general, we have, you know, a pretty junky culture. You know, it's a television or fast food culture. You know, you can see our movies, what most of our movies are, almost all of them, and what our television shows are for the most part, and you know, and our politics. You know, it's not really living up to what we should be living up to.
So, I mean, you'd put quite a lot of people on your Academy of the Overrated, but they wouldn't be quite the same ones that Diane Keaton puts on it in the film.
Right, I wouldn't even say they're overrated. They're nobody even bothers to rate them. People know that there's nothing special about them. They just have given up and are willing to say, I know it's junk, but I'm too lazy to turn the dial or too lazy to do anything about it.
In Manhattan, I think... Oh. Sorry.
26, take one.
All right. Your treatment of the female characters in Manhattan seems a whole world away from the equivalent treatment of female characters in, say, Play It Again, Sam, you know, where the attitude of the central character has moved on from treating women as objects of lust, as it were, you know, must score, through to treating them as friends, as good friends, possible good friends. Is that a change of heart that happened in you in the meantime, or is it a change that happened in the world outside?
No, I probably felt that way all the time, but the other is the path of least resistance for a comedy. Even today, if I was to make a comedy, it would be much easier to make a funny comedy where I'm lusting after somebody. You know, it just would be funnier than to get into the more complex relationship of being a friend. And so I've always had many female friends, but when I made Play It Again, Sam, when I wrote the play, you know, I was just thinking of how to get those laughs. And the quickest route to get the laughs was to be lonely and to lust after my friend's wife, and so I did it.
It's true, isn't it? Because Isaac becomes a much more real person, much more complicated person, because he has this attitude. I mean, he really wants more from life.
Right, sure. It's a different character entirely.
Stardust Memories now. Were you getting your own back on the people who didn't like interiors when you made Stardust Memories?
No, not at all. I was trying to make, again, a funny film, but with a serious idea behind it. You know, I wanted to try and make a film about a man who had, presumably to the outside eye, everything. He had money and he was famous, and yet he had come to a point in life where he realized still that he was still going to wind up on the junk heap with everybody else, and it didn't mean anything, and that nothing saves you, not being an artist, not being rich, not being famous or wealthy, or none of that can save you. And him coming to terms with that idea over the course of this weekend, which really happens in his mind for the most part. But many people saw that film as me attacking my fans and saying the people out there that are enjoying my films are clawing and pawing and silly looking, but that had nothing to do with the film at all.
I mean, the movie buffs in the film all look as though they've stepped up the pages of Diane Arbus or something. I mean,
well, I was trying to make funny. I wanted to make it, a serious cartoon. I mean, I wanted to make it, Baroque in that sense.
I mean, where do you find such faces? I mean, they're remarkable.
Just in the streets of New York. I mean, we just
you go out hunting for them.
Yeah. And the only reason people look like that is I wanted to show his subjective state of mind, that everybody looked funny or threatening, or and that's all that I tried to do with that.
I mean, they do look like the sort of people that write the definitive book on Gummo Marx,
Right. Now that was my favorite film for a while. I mean, if you had asked me that just until a couple of years ago, that would have been my favorite film of mine. It was my least popular film, but it was certainly my own personal favorite.
And it looks, in retrospect, to be you saying goodbye to autobiographical style films, saying, I'm not going to make films where people can confuse my life with my work
but that's
anymore.
exactly what happened on that film. There was an enormous amount of confusion between people thinking that I was the lead character and that I was saying that I didn't have a high regard for my audience and they were fools, and but this was not what the film was about. But I was a little bit hurt by the misapprehension that it was autobiographical.
And you seem to be saying, in the scenes, for example, when as a child you're a conjurer, sleight of hand and so on, that, in future I want to be a storyteller, I want to be a magician. I don't want to make films where people are going to confuse my life and my work anymore. Certainly in retrospect, it looks like that sort of turning point, because after that you started telling stories again.
Right, but they did in that film confuse the two very much.
Zelig took several years to plan, evidently, because the technical side of it is obviously very, very complicated.
Well, no, it took a long time to make. It didn't take several years to plan.
Oh.
It was one of those things where I pulled it out of the typewriter and went right to work on it. But it took a long time to do, very long to do.
What gave you the original idea for the film? Because it's a very bizarre one on the face of it.
I had always wanted to do a documentary comedy, always, from my first days. That's why I did Take the Money and Run. But I wanted to make a doc... Oh.
27, take one.
So what gave you the original idea for Zelig?
I had always wanted to do a documentary film. I tried it in Take the Money and Run. It was my first film, and I could achieve a certain amount of it. But I wanted to do it more Spartanly. I wanted to do it like a real, actual documentary where you just about couldn't tell the difference. And I thought the theme of a character who was always trying to be who he was around was a universal psychological theme, because I had known many people who would always accommodate to the group that they were with. And I felt that ultimately would lead to fascism, because you would always be saying what the crowd wanted to hear and giving up your own beliefs and personality. And so I combined the two and did it. And one thing that happened in the United States was that the film was well received over here, but the psychological details of the film were overlooked a lot, because people were amazed by the documentary quality we were able to give it. Now, we did put a lot of work into that, and we were all glad that we could do that. But I didn't want it to overshadow the theme and content of the film. But to many people, it did. Many people, were very much taken with the way we did it.
Because it does look like a film by someone fascinated with technicalities, in a funny way,
Well, it's a good reproduction of a documentary. I mean, those kind of films appear on our television programs, very, very frequently. I could have told that same story realistically, but I didn't want to because I felt it was a national story or worldwide story, and I wanted to show its importance in general. And so that's what happened with that here.
After all the technicalities of Zelig, Broadway Danny Rose is much more like a short story, I think. It has a feel of being slightly improvised, being a lot of fun, being very relaxing to make. I don't know if that's entirely spurious.
Well, almost. It was not relaxing because none of them are relaxing. They were all very arduous and hard work, and we're all go around angry and depressed, and But it was, Mia and I eat at an Italian restaurant in town frequently, and there's a woman who owns it, and Mia said to me, "I'd always wanted to play someone who looked like that." And this woman, has got that blonde hair, and she's always got dark glasses on, even if it's 2 a.m, and smokes a cigarette, and she looks great. And so I thought, what could I write for Mia where she could play something like that? And then the story began to come to me, and I started to do it, and that's the evolution of that.
You got a fantastic performance out of Mia Farrow.
Oh, she was great in it.
It was just a revelation, actually.
She was great, yeah. She was
she
great.
could be
To me,
broad
too.
and brassy and all that.
To me, too. She lost her nerve, of course, when we started to shoot, and said, "No, I don't know how I got into this. I don't think I can do it." But she was wonderful from the first day. As soon as she gave up her apprehensions and
so, she had the dark glasses and the hair to hide behind in a way, too.
right. Of course, it's not easy for an actress to work behind dark glasses for a whole movie because you don't realize until you try it how much they're doing with their eyes, and that's suddenly out of bounds for them.
In a way, you surprised me that it started with that aspect of the story rather than with the vaudeville aspect of it, because obviously from the point of view of your biography, the vaudeville side seems to be nearer to you, having,
Right, but that
been
was
brought up in that school, as it were.
That was incidental material from my life. I mean, I wanted to do that story about her, and as I began developing the story and my characters, evolved, I was able to draw on things that I knew about, which was my own beginnings in not quite vaudeville, but nightclubs.
Yes, you've said that it's the best education that a comedian can get, but one of the themes is, presumably, of Broadway Danny Rose is how all that's decayed. It's gone, in a way.
Right, that kind of thing is just about gone. I mean, it does exist to a degree, but when I first started, it was already on the wane, and it was a very rich, wonderful world of comedians and jugglers and strange acts and balloon folders and ventriloquists, and each one thinking that huge success was just around the corner and hoping that they would get the perfect manager to make them famous, and invariably the manager would find them and build them up to some small degree, and then they would leave him. This just happened.
But not skating
axiomatically.
penguins dressed as rabbis. I think that must have been you, wasn't it?
that was a prefabrication. I made
I
that
don't
up.
think anyone had that. All right.
It's 21 log sync pulse 50 Hz, 25 frames per second, transferred to 16 mode, please. Transcription cassette also required. Rule 6, Woody Allen profile.
28, take 1.
The Purple Rose of Cairo partly celebrates, I think, the power of cinema to help people escape, but also shows that that's a trap. And yet it's set in the past. I mean, do you think that cinema no longer has that power?
It probably does to a degree, not like it did when I was growing up, because there was no television, and and before I grew up in the 30s and the 20s, what a mad scene that was. People just rushing to the cinema. Where I grew up, it was a little dinky neighborhood in Brooklyn. There were 20 wonderful cinemas, within 10 blocks of my house or something. I mean, you just couldn't believe it. The whole country was cinema crazy. And the big studios were making, hundreds of films a year. Now they don't do that anymore, and so but in those days it had huge power of empathy and escapism.
But you show, I think, one of the most subtle things about the film, which is very subtle in my view, is that not only does the magic of the cinema not really help Cecilia, although she thinks it does, but that the character in the film can't cope with the real world. You do a kind of mirror image of that,
right?
Which is an interesting theme.
The film was only incidentally about cinema. I mean, it could have just as easily been a character from a book she's reading comes out to her, or a character walks off a stage play. I mean, it was just happened. I just wanted to do that because it was a good graphic for me. But the object of the movie was very simply put to show that that we all have to choose between reality and fantasy, and we're of course forced to choose reality. Otherwise, the other way lies madness. And when you choose reality, you get hurt because reality hurts you. And that's what she did. She was at least mature enough in the movie at the end to choose reality over fantasy, and then the reality stabbed her in the back.
Sure.
Because that's what reality does. It kills you.
Not always, but...
No, but enough times. It does always kill you, actually. And it's so treacherous that it would be great if you could live the life that you see in the book. That is the controlled life, the life that one can control in a book or a play or a film.
The idea for Hannah and her sisters apparently came to you when you were rereading Anna Karenina.
Yes, this is true.
What's the connection?
I was just rereading the book one summer and thinking, it would be fun to do a movie where you saw a little bit of one story and a little of another, and then went back to that, and then went to a third, and back to that style of and that's how I got the idea to do that kind of a movie.
The three male characters in the story seem to me to represent three aspects of Woody Allen, if I can put it that way. I mean, there's the romantic Michael Caine character, there's the artist who, carries a lot of weight in his head about what's going on in the universe and everything, and there's Mickey, the questioning one. And they're all sort of three bits of Woody, but you're only one of them.
Yes, here your observation is correct, I will say. This is true. I could have played any of those roles and did feel, I felt that I could have played the part that Michael Caine played, perhaps not as well, but I could have played it. And I played the part I did play, and I could have played Max von Sydow's part also, because I did feel I was writing myself in all those characters, definitely.
And one gets the feeling that, again, this may be completely wrong, that in recent years that you almost feel that you don't want the Woody Allen character to be in it, that someone else can do that work now. That, the directing and writing, yes, but that you're marginalising the Woody Allen character.
Yes, I'd like to spend a little more time directing. That's why I was not in Radio Days. I was not in the film as yet to come out that follows Radio Days, and I'm not going to be in the film that I'm planning to shoot this fall, because I don't want to be in every film, and I don't want to make every film a comic film. I'd like to make the next 10 or 15 or whatever films I make, I'd like to make, half of them quite serious films, and that would eliminate me immediately, because I wouldn't want to be in a serious film as an actor, because I don't think I could do it and wouldn't want to anyhow.
Well, I think you probably could, but the audience wouldn't accept it.
They wouldn't accept me, and I'm not sure that I could, that I wouldn't be too inhibited to really get too emotional on the screen.
The ending of Hannah seems optimistic. I mean, whenever I've seen it, there's been a kind of palpable sense of relief amongst the audience when Holly says, "I'm pregnant" at the end, because I think it's probably the first Woody Allen film they've ever seen which doesn't have a sting in its tail, where they don't leave thinking, God, the last 5 minutes just turned me completely around. It seems optimistic. I mean, is it?
It's only optimistic in the sections that I failed, because I wanted to make a film that was not optimistic. I wanted to make a film about a man's irrational, sudden passion for his sister-in-law, and a man who's told that he's going to die, and then suddenly, when it turns out that he's not, doesn't want to go back to work or anything, and just walks the streets questioning life, and finally doesn't come to any big conclusion. Reads all these books and all that, and is going to blow his brains out. And figures, what the hell, I won't. Why should I? That's not going to solve anything. I mean, I wanted it to be a melancholy film for the most part, but for some reason, incompetence in the directing or the writing or something, the emphasis shifted so that it was perceived by audiences as more up and optimistic than I had intended, and consequently was very popular.
Yes, I feared that might be the case. Yes. What you say about the public's reaction to it is really makes me think of. I think there's 10 books now written about you, or perhaps more even worldwide, and a lot of people say a lot of very pretentious things about your films, and from this interview, it's clear that you know, you reject that. I mean, you don't want people to make claims of your work that aren't there.
Right, right. They can make claims if they're there, but it's
Right.
silly to...
But is it difficult not to play the game, as other film directors have, and be pretentious?
It's fun to be pretentious because, you know, you think that you're deep and that other people regard you as deep, but it's easy not to yes, it's easy not to play the game because it's silly. I would be dishonest if I was, you know, I tried to be completely honest with you in all these films, and, you know, they're very often, if audiences had any idea with many filmmakers or most filmmakers how many accidents they're seeing and how many things that didn't start out to be what they are, you know, they would be very surprised. And this goes for the best of filmmakers.
Yes, I have a picture in my mind of Woody Allen and Mia Farrow surrounded these days by pets and children and homes and domestic life, which is a very long way away from the Woody Allen of old that audiences tend to associate with you. Has there been a dramatic change?
Well, no, because Mia and I we don't live together. She is surrounded by kids and pets, and I live by myself across the park, and we see each other quite frequently, but no, I'm still as I was. I mean, I do play with the kids all the time, but then I never have to be there when the diapers are changed or anything, you know, really awful happens.
Yes, and do you still hold your same views of the countryside that your characters always held? Because I know Mia Farrow has a place in Connecticut.
Yes, and it's always a sore point between us. She loves it, and I can never bear to go to the country. I mean, I'm a strictly urban person still, and I have all the same old prejudices and
the crickets
feelings.
make you nervous and all that.
The crickets make me nervous, definitely.
Yeah, so there's no thought you wouldn't retire to a rustic
Not
American
to the country,
place.
I wouldn't. No.
You've recently said, "I wish someone would come in and tell me I can't make films anymore."
Mm-hmm.
In a recent interview, is that true? That if
Well,
somebody actually said you don't have to do it anymore, would
right,
you be
it would be sort of a load off my mind. I'd like to write books, but it seems such a shame not to make films while people are willing to finance them, because everyone wants to make films and people are giving me millions of dollars to make these films, to put them on. So I figure someday I'll be old and enfeebled and won't want to get up in the morning and do it, and I'll write the books then. But it would not bother me if someone said tomorrow, you can never make another film. I mean, I'd probably get up in the morning relieved and relaxed, and because I enjoy writing.
And is there any particular way you'd like to be remembered?
Oh.
Looking back, I mean, you know, if you had to put in a nutshell what your legacy might be.
Well, what would be great, of course, would be, you know, to have been a significant contributor as a filmmaker. I don't feel that I've made a great film yet in my life. I hope I will make at least one and maybe a couple. But I don't think, you know, if one's standards for great films are, you know, The Bicycle Thief and Grand Illusion, you know, and that would be, I'd like to be remembered as someone who made at least one, if not one or two, really great films.
Mm-hmm. And you're soon to become a father, for which congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Do you hope that he or she is going to be a chip off the old Woody, as it were?
I hope it's a she. That's the first thing. I mean, that would be very important to me. And no, I just hope, you know, I hope it's a she and that she's healthy. That's all I really care about. The rest is unimportant.
Thank you very much.
Okay.